This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. My name's Michael Connolly and it is my absolute pleasure and privilege to be your host on today's show. Joining me as usual is my brother, business partner and partner in Basket Casey goodness and navigator through Basket Casey crappiness, Steve Connolly. Welcome,
Hello.
Steve.
Yes, it is your pleasure to have me with you once again, as well as all of our wonderful listeners. Just ask me.
Just ask me how good I am. How good are you, Steve? I mean, how are you, Steve?
Yes, both good.
Yes.
And today we are talking facility management, and this is one of our awesome sessions where we're going to be talking about facility management in the context of an education and training series that we do in partnership with the City of Moreton Bay. And we've been working, how long have we been? Well, we've been working with the City of Moreton Bay since before the City of Moreton Bay existed.
It's before the dawn of time. Yeah. Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, the City of Moreton Bay is the largest local government area on the face of this earth, maybe? It's
one of the
darn
big ones, I think. Brisbane's big. So in Queensland, you've got lots and lots of big cities, lots and lots of big local government areas. In WA, in Metro Melbourne, Metro Sydney, you've got lots and lots of very little councils. So some of the council areas total 6 square kilometres. And what's the City of Moreton Bay? Like
a little bigger.
1 million kilometres. It's they're massive. So you can quickly Google that. But it's interesting for anyone who's following along at home. If you write down City of Moreton Bay as just the first letters, it's called the comb. So they've all got very straight hair at Moreton Bay.
Oh, very good.
Hey, good. Somebody sent me a message because I said something funny in a WhatsApp group chat. And seriously, I got this. Michael, you need to give us warning if you're going to drop dad jokes this early in the morning. How do I, like, how long have we known each other? Surely you don't need to be warned to know I'm going to drop crappy jokes.
If there's a message, if you get a notification from Michael Connolly, just assume it's a dad joke.
No, some of them are important.
Well, so are dad jokes. So at a quick Google search, the land area of the City of Moreton Bay is a little over 2,000 square kilometres. So it's a big geographical region.
That's a big chunk of land. Yeah.
It's not the biggest local government area on the face of this earth. However, it's pretty big.
So close to the biggest in the known universe.
Yes. Yeah. Good point. So we have been working with the City of Moreton Bay since before the city was a city, or even a region before that. And it is now a conglomerate of 3 former local government areas, being Caboolture, Redcliffe and Pine. It is an awesome opportunity that we have and have for many years to work with the city, but importantly with the volunteers in community organisations across the city who love what they do so much that they do it for free, which is something I've been saying a lot of lately, but we really do value our work with people who are the heart and soul of our communities across Australia, including right here on our doorstep in southeast Queensland in the City of Moreton Bay. So this session, which was a community session held in the evening on Wednesday, the 11th of March 2026, was a glowing success. And we had some great involvement from local volunteers who were really keen to learn more about how to keep their facilities in tip-top shape, but also how to do great planning for facilities and ensure that the use of their facilities is optimised, but also that they're accessing those facilities for the right purposes and the right uses. And we had some great questions, some of which we might touch on in this chat. So I figured this would be a great opportunity for us to once again put our heads together and talk through some of the challenges that organisations, not only in the City of Moreton Bay, but also across all of Australia, face when it comes to planning, designing, maintaining, providing access to great community facilities.
Where I want to start is our acknowledgement of country. So in every episode, we have an acknowledgement of country, and it's because I think that, and maybe you and I have a really strong connection to land because of where we grew up. We grew up in an amazing part of the world on the banks of the river, and you're too young, but I was born in Melbourne. So to be in a place that is warm, where the wildlife is abundant, and where there's pelicans swooping in and scooping up fish, and then I'm getting bit on the toe by a crab as we're swimming in the like. What an amazing place to live! And the important part of I believe the important part of an acknowledgement of country is that we acknowledge that we're not the first people to walk this earth. And we're certainly not the first people to take care of this land. We have inherited land that has been maintained and respected, and for all of the reasons I just said, that there's wildlife here that served as, it's beautiful, it's nice to look at, but it's also good tucker. A lot of the stuff that lives here is good to eat. And if we didn't have people here before us looking after the place and making sure that it was here for their children and their children and our children, because we are the children of the children of the children. And so now we've got a place where we can play. And I realized recently when Jess, my daughter, said, "Dad, you know that Night Before Christmas book that you stole off Nana and Pop you had when you had Chris, because we were the first in the generation to have kids." And so I stole the Night Before Christmas book that Dad used to read to us every Christmas Eve. I loved it. It meant that it was Christmas, and the house in the version of the book that we had looked like our house in Olinda and out of Melbourne. Just amazing. And so I stole it. I went, "Well, I got kids now. That's my job." And then she stole it off me. She said, "You know, Dad, I'm sick," because now she's having a baby. She said, "I'm stealing it." And
It's a rite of passage.
Well, yeah. Well, I thought, hang on a minute. I stole that book fair and square. Now I own it. And I thought I was the owner of the book, but it turns out I was merely its custodian for a generation. And I went, mind blowing, because I'm going, I really had a different picture of this. And then my brain straight away went, you know what? I don't even own the land where my house is. That's not mine. Sure, it's my house on it now, but look back through just very recent history, not like we've been talking about with the First Nations people here taking care of the country here, but just look back over the last, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 years through Europe, and you look at the fact that where cathedrals stand now is not the first cathedral that was there. As they've excavated crypts underneath, they found the church that was there before the church that was there before the church that is there now. And so I'm the blip in time. I'm going to be here for such a short amount of time that I don't own this land. All I am doing is looking after it. And I think particularly in sport, if the people who look after our sporting field, our sporting fields, our sporting courts, our clubhouses, if they just realised that they don't own it, their kids don't own it, their grandkids don't own it, because at some point it's going to be completely different in land use, and look back in only as recent history as time when you can still see aerial photography. And we've only had aerial photography since we've had heavier than air powered flight. So you can go and look at what was there before you were there. And okay, for sports grounds, it might be a dump. Okay, it might be a floodplain. But that doesn't mean that what is there now is always going to be there now. So we are but the short-term custodians of this land. And when you have that mindset, you start to think, well, maybe I really should take care of it. Maybe I should take this job seriously. So we are stewards, not owners. And that's true for my house. And it's especially true when we're talking volunteer associations that are on leasehold land that may be being held in trust by a local government authority on behalf of the state. There's layers of tenure here, but we're all just trying to leave it that little bit better than we found it. And if that's all you get from this episode, then you'll start to think the right way, because you'll think, well, okay, well, what are the categories of maintenance that fall to me as the tenant in my LGA versus those that fall to council as the landlord in this LGA? Or in some cases, we've got people leasing private land. But even for those bowls clubs, Steve, that we know some bowls clubs who have owned their own land, who have run such terrible businesses, they haven't committed to their job as stewards. They've just looked at it as an opportunity to make money and get pissed at the bolo, rather than how can we leave this land better than we found it? And that land has been sold off to developers, been resumed by council for park. Those clubs have gone bust and they don't exist, which means, end result, people aren't using that land as open space for physical recreation and healthy activities anymore. Well, not that sinking piss at the bolo is a healthy activity. But playing bowls is.
Playing bowls is indeed, and I think that one of the things that really comes to mind when you're talking, and that's a really, I think, elegant and beautiful way to start the discussion, is that when we're working directly with not-for-profit organisations, we'll often pose a lot of questions to them. One of the questions that we often ask is something like, wouldn't it be great if a committee of this organisation, of which you are now the current committee, 40 years ago thought ahead to this point, and they thought, what facilities are we going to need, and what money in the bank are we going to need to have to be able to afford the development or the replacement of that infrastructure? And the answer we always get is a resounding yes. Of course it would, yes. So then we say, great, so we've established that the best time for you to establish a sinking fund, the best time for you to plan ahead for your eventual asset repair or replacement, or to ensure that you're acting as the custodians or stewards of this infrastructure that you've just explained they should be considering themselves as, was 40 years ago. What's the second best time? And the answer is a very clear today. So that longer term, and this brings to mind for me recollections of the definition of sustainability. And this is something that I learned a lot about when I was studying at university, having studied environmental planning. And sustainability is a term that I think is often seen in too shallow a light. It's not, we don't consider sustainability, and we've talked about this on the podcast previously, and also sort of criticised maybe in some ways the term itself, because it is perhaps an acceptance of mediocrity. We're not necessarily just talking about things continuing to be okay long term, just sustainable. We're talking about thriving, excellent provision of infrastructure facilities. And again, that's not the sort of thing that just happens overnight. That's the sort of momentum that needs to build from one committee to the next, planning ahead and thinking for future generations, as you've just elegantly articulated, to ensure that not only is their operating environment as good as ours is today, but even better. Let's strive for better. And that's, again, segues really nicely into the ways that our local governments across Australia, including the City of Moreton Bay, provide access to their land. So councils, similarly, as you just mentioned, often are the trustees or the managers of state-owned land. And in other states, other than Queensland, it might be titled Crown land, for instance. In Queensland, it's reserve land. And we understand that the state can't manage all of the land that it owns, so it entrusts the management of that land in many cases to a local council. Council doesn't have the resources to provide access to sport, recreation, physical activity and community activities on all the land that it owns or manages. Therefore, it entrusts or empowers a leaseholder or a permit holder organisation to provide access to those services from that land. And so we've got this cascading stakeholder structure. And I suppose for me, one of the really important considerations for organisations that are accessing community land through a lease or through a permit or some other form of tenure, that they see the provision of their services as one that's going to be best achieved through partnership. And often we hear community organisations throwing stones at their local council or throwing stones at their governing body, and they never do anything for us. And we're always really quick to point out that in many cases, council is your biggest sponsor. If you were paying commercial rates to access the land that you're accessing to provide your services, your business model would very unlikely remain sustainable or viable. So see the...
In its current state, you could make changes to make it work, but
absolutely
not as it is.
Nope. So in the City of Moreton Bay, like many other councils across the country, we have tenure afforded to community organisations through a community leasing policy. And there are some fundamental considerations of that policy, including that the organisations getting very affordable access to that land must be purpose-driven, typically not-for-profit organisations. And again, I think that that's an important consideration in this notion of partnership as well as custodianship, that we're far stronger together and we can achieve far better things together. Don't throw stones at council. And the other really important consideration, and this is a theme of all of these training sessions that we run with the City of Moreton Bay particularly, as well as in other council areas, there are people in councils who are there to support you as a volunteer and as a community organisation. Many of those organisations in the council area don't tap into that resource. So you should bloody well do so. Establish a really strong working partnership with your sport and recreation officer or your community liaison officer, whoever it is in council that is dedicated to you as a resource for support. Tap into that and utilise that and empower yourselves as an organisation to do a better job through that partnership.
Very well put. And that point about council as your biggest sponsor, again, look at that, just highlight that bit in the transcript if you're reading along for those playing at home, because that's another stewardship and recognizing that you are actually on a good wicket. Even if you've got to pay for all of the maintenance, you're still on a good wicket because you didn't have to pay for the capital access to the land in the first place at anything above what is typically, and not in all cases, typically peppercorn. It's just a token amount of rent to take the valuable consideration given from both sides. You pay a little bit of money, we give you a really good wicket because, and councils don't do that because they're just being nice. They do that because they want the services that our not-for-profits deliver to be delivered in their area. And so they want to do that with as few barriers as they can.
Yeah.
So I want to jump into the obligations now because this is often the bit that I was going to say our tenants don't get, but there are some council officers that are new to the role and don't have asset management experience that don't understand this. So I just want to break down the different types, the different parts of the role. So I'm going to break this down to say we've got usage, we've got maintenance, we've got renewal, and we've got upgrades. And I want to work through that. So usage is the fact that you've got some form of tenure. So typically that's, well, not typically because there's no one size fits all model because it comes down to what's the philosophy of council, given that we can work somewhere on a continuum from full cost recovery through to full community service obligation. And our experience is typically that it's a long way towards the community service obligation side because we know that not-for-profits can deliver services to the community much more efficiently than a bureaucracy can, with all due respect to our slow, risk-averse, change-averse bureaucracies that are councils. So usage is the fact that you've got access to it. And often the lease, so the formal tenure that says you've got exclusive access that gives you the authority to make money out of that site, is over the building footprint because that's the bit that you can lock up and that's typically the bit where you make your dough. But you can also have other forms of tenure, a permit to occupy, right of use over the field space. But often that's not exclusive. So your usage of those areas is sometimes shared. And it might be even shared down to the hour per field per day. So you might have 4 hours of access on a Monday afternoon to fields 1, 2, 3, and 4, but somebody else is on fields 5 and 6 in a regional facility. And obviously the larger metro areas have different land pressures, and so the facility sharing that we've definitely talked about a number of times is more important in those areas where there's not a lot of land. But just because we're in a regional or a rural area that has lots of available land doesn't mean that we've got enough money to develop it all as usable sporting facilities. So there's still pressure. So it's why these things are important to begin with and why that tenure instrument should define what usage is allowed there and is encouraged there, all of which is is to be consistent with the purpose of the land.
Mm.
Good. I see you nodding. That means I'm going to move on. So that's the usage bit. Now we've got the maintenance bit, and this bit is where sometimes we see fights begin. So I'm going to jump to the end and say, how do we solve the fights? Okay, number one, read your lease because it's all there. Whatever the tenure instrument is, it's all there. Now, the lease might be supported by a framework document. It will be supported by a policy document that says this is a position that this particular local government authority takes towards issuing. So it should talk to that philosophy that I talked about, issuing land for community purposes. But regardless, it will say, and there might also be guidelines that support that. So there's going to be typically a range of information, but the most important one is the legal document, the one that's very often registered on the land title that says you have a legal interest in this site and it is in the lease. So there's the lease number and you'll have a lease document. A lot of it looks like copy and paste stuff, but it's actually really important. There'll be schedules that talk about hours of access, hours of use, restrictions of use. So obviously, you're probably not allowed to sell drugs and firearms and weapons. Although some gun clubs. Anyway, still
Uh,
can't sell drugs.
and one of the interesting points that we addressed during the community workshop online is in relation to this very consideration of maintenance obligations. And one of the traps that organisations often fall into, and you know this from working directly with organisations across the country, where you know maybe some sport related infrastructure, so infrastructure very specifically on a site for use by that sport. So let's say field lighting. It is often assumed by organisations that when that stuff reaches the end of its useful life, we'll just get council to replace that because they own or manage this land. Or the age old, how are you going to fund this? We'll just get a grant.
Get a grant.
And as we've harped on about many times during this podcast, grants, reliance on grants is a pretty terrible business model. But so I think that it's easy enough for people to grasp the concept, even if not taking the step to create a sinking fund, that they're able to typically grasp the concept of contributing to a sinking fund year on year to a sufficient extent so that by the time you need to replace some expensive infrastructure like lighting poles and drivers and LED luminaires, you're going to have enough money in the bank to at least contribute towards a grant, but ideally cover the cost of that replacement entirely. And if you can get a grant, great, you get to keep hold of some of your own money. But one of the challenges that groups in Moreton Bay are running into is this real genuine problem of copper theft. So copper being stolen from lighting infrastructure, and lighting infrastructure doesn't really work very well without the without the internal workings of that infrastructure. So clubs need to be aware, particularly in Moreton Bay, and this is the same in many local government areas across the country. It's up to clubs to ensure that stuff. And many clubs don't consider that in their insurance responsibilities. They might look at directors and officers liability insurance. They might look at public liability insurance. They might even look at contents insurance for stuff that's stored in their clubhouse, but they're not necessarily expanding their insurance coverage to their sport-related infrastructure. So this is something that can really hamstring the operations of an organisation. If it's a sporting club and all of its training and games happen at night under lights and it can't run its lights, that can have a significant impact on its ability to do business. So it's a matter, again, exactly as you said, of getting really clear on your obligations in your lease, reading that document. And if you're newly elected to a committee and the lease is, halfway through its term, that's not a good enough excuse to say, oh yeah, I don't need to look at that until it's up for renewal. You must read and understand that lease and not just make assumptions that someone else has done so and has put in place appropriate measures such as sinking fund contributions to ensure eventual asset repair and replacement is able to be taken care of, but also things like insurance.
Another point about reading the lease is, it's all of the answers are in the lease about obligations. It's all clear. And if you've got questions, you can either commission a legal opinion or, as you say, go and lean on the assistance that is in council that often, and these proactive sorts of discussions are the ones that we through our staff training programs in councils. These are the ones that we're encouraging council officers to have because they're the ones that add value. Coming and wrapping you over the knuckles for putting a tap in the wrong place in the building, that's reactive and it doesn't really support any growth and it doesn't help. But the other thing is that you might read it and say, oh, I don't like that. I don't like, no, we're not going to do that because I don't like it. And I didn't sign this lease. It doesn't matter. It was signed by your organisation, by your predecessors, authorised to sign on behalf of the organisation. Therefore, you are bound by it. Even though you didn't sign it, it is signed by the organisation. It's just the organisation doesn't have hands, it has delegates. And those delegates were the president, secretary, treasurer, whoever it was on the committee that signed it before you. Now you're still bound by it. So that term of the lease will continue and you must honour your obligations. This is really important and it bugs me a lot that people still don't get this. And it's the same point that you raised before. Councils do support clubs and you do have obligations. And I really liked how I would have said the lights. You said the luminaires, and it made me think of, isn't he the candlestick guy?
He is. Yeah.
Beauty and
Beauty
the
and the
Beast.
Beast. That's
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's break down maintenance. because maintenance isn't one thing, is it? We've got different ranges of maintenance, and often these are split. So the organization that is using the facility is usually responsible for the operational maintenance. So operational maintenance would mean things like keep the place clean and tidy. If you want to go and play on the field and you have a lease over that field, it's your job to mow it so that it's playable. That's operational maintenance. There's a level of maintenance that sits above that, which is statutory maintenance. And this is really important because it's the statutory maintenance that must be done by people with qualifications. So if an asbestos inspection needs to be done and you're not a qualified asbestos inspector, don't do it because you could get dead. If you need your RCDs to be tested by a qualified electrician, don't go doing it because you could get dead. You can do a non-qualified test by clicking the button, the little safety switch button that says test weekly or whatever. Click, okay, it went off. You don't know how quickly it went off. So you still don't know if it's right. So it needs to be tested for compliance. And so that's why it's statutory maintenance. Backflow prevention devices, if you've got lifts or elevators, if you've got commercial HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, which a lot of clubhouses do because they've got commercial extraction hoods above their chip fryers. They've got ducted air conditioning systems, which are considered commercial HVAC. So the maintenance of those facilities fits in the statutory bucket. And it's really important you know who's responsible for that because you can't do it, but neither can the council officers, yet it must be done. So who's responsible for commissioning that maintenance? Because it's got to be done.
And that will be specific to your local government area and your tenure instrument. And
Yeah.
what we
And there might even
sometimes
be categorizations within that. So some organisation types may have to pay for it, others, council pays for it for you.
Yep. And we'll often see groups looking over the local government boundary at clubs or associations, in the council area next door and crying poor saying, oh, they get that done for them. And in Moreton Bay, if it's a standard natural grass sporting field, for instance, council will actually mow that for you. Now, you may tell council, hey, we want to do it more often. We want to do it differently. We want to do it our way. So we're going to take that on. We're opting to do so. But by default, standard natural grass sporting fields in the city of Moreton Bay are mowed by council, maintained by council. Now, if you have a specific synthetic sporting infrastructure surface, for instance, a synthetic sporting surface, then that's up to you to maintain and that's up to you to replace at the end of its useful life. And again, this is stuff that's often overlooked by organisations when they're planning for the future.
And I love
Or
this,
not planning for the
or
future.
not planning for the future more commonly. And look, I love nerding out like this because I don't get to very often. Often it's just, thinking strategy and business growth for the clubs. But when you get into the nitty gritty like this, it's great. We can create a spreadsheet. We can create a matrix of maintenance here. So we've done operational, we've done statutory. The next one is preventative maintenance. So it's kind of maintenance that we know we're going to do. And I sometimes call this planned maintenance because we know that I was going to say fire extinguishers, but fire maintenance is a statutory, fits into statutory maintenance. But let's say we've got not ducted air conditioning, but domestic grade air conditioning, so a split system. There will be manufacturer recommendations that say the filters in the head unit on the wall inside should be cleaned every 6 months. So that's preventative maintenance because if you don't do that, then it can clog up and ruin the whole system. If you don't get in and clean the tracks of the sliding windows and doors, then the rollers can shit the bed and you can end up with doors that don't work very well. So that's preventative maintenance because a little bit of maintenance now prevents a big repair bill in the future. So, massive piece of advice, something else to highlight or write down as you're listening along is if you've got the ability to do that preventative maintenance, a few pennies spent today can save thousands tomorrow. So it's really important that you do that little bit and never neglect it. Always make sure that you've got top of mind oversight of these sorts of things. And then the last one is reactive maintenance. So reactive maintenance is we've got a toilet and it is overflowing because we've had 1,000 people here and we've only had one dunny. So what do we do? So again, there's usually a process and there will be a responsible party for that. And reactive maintenance is typically when something breaks down. So the hot water system's broken down, a toilet's backed up, the an oven, a built-in oven has stopped working. So then who's responsible for that? And quite often there's a split there because some things like plumbing, for instance, might actually signify that the failure of a toilet might actually signify a more sinister problem like a tree root that's grown through a sewer line. An oven, well, you're making money out of turning that oven on, so you need to go and fix the oven. So there's typically a balance there.
Mm.
So we've got the usage, we've got the maintenance, and then we get into the next category, which we call renewal. So renewal means, as you say, there's a time in every asset's life when it reaches the end. This is now no longer fit for purpose, and typically we see the facilities become unsafe, and so that's when we know they're typically getting towards the end of their useful life. So renewal is maintenance work that is designed to bring it back up to its original standard. So if it was when it was new, what do we need to do to bring this building back up to its original new standard? So that might mean over time, the roof structure has got some rust in it, so we need to replace the roof. We need to replace the roofing sheets. I talked about failing windows and doors, so they will need to be replaced. So there's more considerable expenditure that is capital expenditure rather than maintenance expenditure, but it's designed to bring the building back up to its original standard, which is quite different from the last one, which is upgrade, which means improving the standard of the facility or expanding its ability to serve. So that might mean that we've got a facility that at the moment has two change rooms and they're not fantastic. But if we want to bring those change rooms back up to original standard, but make them a bit bigger and put another couple on that can be opened, that can be separated into four independent change rooms or two massive change rooms for when we then have big events on our main field, that's then an upgrade. And again, it's really important that you understand who's responsible for those, because if it's the tenant that's going to be getting the benefit out of those upgrades, then the tenant is usually responsible for, if not funding those upgrades, at least kicking the can. And this is to go back to your point about grants before, where grants are not a good business model, they can be a good growth model. So we can absolutely access grants for growth, but one of the secrets about grant writing is always have something to bring to the table, because the more you're seen to be contributing, the more it's obvious that you've got skin in the game because you're going to be a beneficiary of whatever this project means. It all comes back to running a good business. So there's so much in that, and once somebody unpacks, I've found that once somebody unpacks it like this, and I've certainly had these conversations. I'm quite good at it, as you can tell, because I've had it a million times. I've had this conversation on both sides of the fence. And then people go, gee, I wish I'd known that before I'd sent that nasty letter to council. Or,
Yeah.
gee, I wish I'd known that before I sent that nasty letter to that club. Like, just unpacking it in this level of, obviously, you've still got to read your lease. You can't abdicate your responsibility to read your lease to us just because we know this stuff and we're talking about it. But it helps when somebody explains it in real, plain English terms that matter to our sector. We're talking about sport here. Let's talk in sport terms, and that's what makes it really clear.
So we've talked about usage and maintenance particularly, and now we're talking about upgrades, and I think that that's probably a good opportunity before we wrap up to touch on facility planning and to make sure that the way that we are planning to use our infrastructure is coordinated and informed by appropriate stakeholders. And the council is a critical stakeholder there, as well as, if you're a community organisation, your membership, your customers, as well as the local community in some cases when we're talking about significant facility upgrades. But one of the things I think that's often overlooked is when we're talking about building or renewing or upgrading community infrastructure, that infrastructure needs to be planned and constructed to a commercial standard. And people often overlook that when they think, just cost me a few $100,000 to build a whole house. So surely when we come to build a change room at our club, it's not going to cost that much. And we've been doing this work for a little while now, and we can remember back to when you did get a pretty good clubhouse for a few $100,000, a very good clubhouse indeed. It's very different now. And you need to take account of the fact that you are providing access to and working in partnership with council to provide access to public land, and therefore infrastructure must be planned and constructed to ensure the safety of people who are accessing that land. And we've got some really sad stories to which we've been exposed through our work of infrastructure failing, retaining walls coming down, media towers crashing down, and people getting injured or worse. And that's never okay. And councils and community organisations, again, need to work in partnership to recognise their duty of care to people accessing these public spaces and make sure that when we build things, we build them right the first time. Not only do we maintain them and plan for their eventual renewal, replacement, and ideally upgrade, but we actually get it right the first time. So building to code, following planning approval processes. In Moreton Bay, there's a really well-established improvement works application process that takes care of a lot of that planning consideration for organisations that are proposing to do work on council-owned or managed land. Those Bolds clubs that you mentioned, for instance, or other organisations that own their own land, then they're not subject to the improvement works application process in Moreton Bay. However, they are still subject to other planning and building approval requirements. So it's really a matter of, again, approaching the people in council who are there to support you, tapping into their advice and expertise and support, and never, ever telling yourselves or others in your organisation that you'll simply beg for forgiveness later. When we're talking about planning and constructing safe, accessible, compliant facilities, we are absolutely talking about doing planning right and asking for permission first.
Mm. Yeah, and look, the other thing about planning for good facilities is don't skimp on the actual planning. Like you can't, you wouldn't ever, to go back to your building a house analogy, you wouldn't ever build a house without doing proper plans first, and you wouldn't ever build a house on your land that was not properly certified. And so take the right approach, but recognize that we're dealing with commercial construction, not domestic construction. And we're dealing with different layers of government, particularly where you've got investors, and I'll call them investors rather than funders or grant agencies, because these are investors in your future from state and federal and local government. Even if local government's not funding the build, they're still giving you the land. So it's really important that you understand that the investment in planning can be considerable. So what's the business case for doing it? What are we actually going to build? How are we going to use it? How are we going to manage it? And how are we going to run our business so well that our maintenance obligations, our renewal and upgrade obligations are so easy to meet because we're running a good business and we got plenty of money to do it. And people love us for what we do. So I think to finish, Steve, I want to go back to a word that you've used a few times, and it's partnership. So it's a partnership to do the development. And when we're talking about facility maintenance, we're really talking about the coalface, the grassroots. It's the usage. It's the on the ground level of government, which in our case is local councils and municipalities, and it's the people, mums and dads on the committees who are running those facilities for the benefit of our communities. When you understand that we are all trying to achieve the same result, which is an active, healthy, engaged, and connected community, that's what we all want. We recognize we're actually serving the same customer base. So when you work hand in hand as partners, that's when we can have this as a proper symbiotic relationship between the different levels of government and landlord and tenant, and that's when we get great outcomes. What could be better?
I couldn't agree more strongly. Yeah, and it's also taking a really mature approach to your custodianship and recognizing that you are there as the short-term, and we talk a lot about this in a governance sense, you're the short-term custodians of your organisation, which is a body corporate with perpetual succession. So enshrined in the very legal structure of your organisation is the reality, those two words, perpetual succession, that someone else is going to be doing the job that you're doing today in maybe 12 months, maybe 12 years, but you're not going to be there forever. And nowhere is that truer, I believe, than in facility management and the need to be planning for your future members. And I've even heard community organisation presidents, for instance, I can think of one in particular, it's probably people in other positions as well, but I can just think of one particular club president that said to me these very words, or certainly words, almost identical to this: we're not concerned about members of this club in the future, we're concerned about servicing our members today.
Whoa.
Now, based on the face that you just pulled, for those of you who are just listening to this podcast, you can probably imagine the sort of response that I gave him. It was probably as nearest to a scolding I've given any club president in my life.
Please get out of the chair, mate.
Yep.
Like there's somebody behind you who knows the importance of stewardship. It ain't you. Please vacate the chair.
Yep. So that was, as we often experience, it was a light bulb moment for me, but it was shocking, if nothing else, that he would so sternly share that philosophy or principle position with me. And he's no longer the club president, mind you.
But it doesn't work that way, Steve. Like if I pillage the land for my benefit now, yeah, I benefit, but the future doesn't. If I sustain the land now for the benefit of the future, guess what? It's better for us as well.
Yes.
Like, and it doesn't cost any more money or time.
Nope.
Just mindset. And that's the thing that I've been trying to get across it. You know, it's like changing gears in your head, this mindset shift to say, oh, we don't own it. We're just stewards. And like, I'm literally moving house next week for the first time in 20 something years. And I'm actually going through this saying I'm more at peace with leaving this where I've brought up my kids. You know, I've so much of me and my personality is in this place, but I'm going, well, the land will still be here in a million years. Somebody else is just looking after this place until then. And it just made me so much more peaceful with it. Anyway, look, if you've been listening to this and you've thought, oh, I don't know a lot of this stuff, and this has really opened my eyes to a whole heap of, like, I've never had anyone unpack the maintenance stuff, and I don't know how to read my lease, and I don't want to go and speak to the people at council because I'm a bit worried that I might get in trouble for what I haven't been doing. That's perfectly understandable. And we sometimes run, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but we call them basket case clubs confessionals, where we literally listen to people tell us stories about the things that they might be doing wrong that they've never thought about before until they've listened to one of these episodes or joined us in a workshop or a webinar. So if that's you and you want to talk, I won't say anonymously because we need to know who you are, but confidentially about what's going on, maybe we can put your mind at ease. Or maybe we can say, yeah, that is wrong. And most importantly, here is the path forward. Here is what you need to do. So we are very happy to have those conversations. So please find us on our website, cprgroup.com.au, click the little contact button and tell them Michael and Steve sent you. We'll be very happy to help. Thanks, of course, to Jess for being our wonderful editor and producer, to editing out all of the bloopers that I'm sure we have probably forgotten about that we went through in this episode. Make sure you follow us on social media at CPR Group Oz and at NFP Michael, where we've got daily doses of good governance tips for you. LinkedIn, Insta, Facebook, wherever you want to get your social fill. And if you're going to doom scroll, you might as well doom scroll with shit that's going to help you, hey? Steve, as usual, it's been a pleasure to rant about stewardship and the nerdiness of facility management, and I look forward to chatting with you next time we basket case clubs together.
Likewise, thank you, Michael, and thank you once again to the City of Moreton Bay for the opportunity to continue our work together in supporting your volunteer organisations across the city to do facility management and generally to do business better.
And of course, for everyone else who's outside the city of Moreton Bay, you've got a bit of FOMO now, so you better get onto council and say, hey, you need to get Michael and Steve to come and run some workshops for us. They're the best. See ya.
See ya.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.